App provider is good. Lib, we don't have anything yet, which is fine. Same for hooks. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put the use local storage hook in there. So I'm just going to create a new file. We'll call it use local storage state. I'm calling it use local storage state because I think making another hook for just accessing local storage should be separate from that, because this is actually creating a new like component state which will re-render the component every single time it changes. So we might in some cases want to just access a value from local storage but not like re-render the component when we do that. So that's why I'm specifying here that it's use local storage state. And this will just be .ts. And if we go back in here, I'm just going to go ahead and copy basically the boilerplate for using local storage state. So go back to our project, and we'll just paste that in here. Oh yeah, I also have a helper function that I'll probably import as well, which is, I'll just cover this real quick. So I have a helper function inside of my project template, which is super simple. It's just, if I go here, I just call it machine.js, and it just returns, or it just exports two functions, and both of these functions basically will just tell you whether or not the code is currently running on the client or the server, because nextjs will actually run all of its code on the server first and then run on the client, and you can run into a lot of issues there if you're doing something in a component that you can only do on the client, like say for example getting the size of your window. If you just like try to access the window height and window width inside of your code, that will actually error, because the first time that code runs, it'll be running on the server, and a window doesn't exist on the server because it's just that machine. It's not an actual like client with a user interface. So a lot of times you'll have to check and see whether or not the code is running server side or client side. So I'm just making these two utility functions to basically just check and see where the code is currently running. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy these two functions into our project. So inside of lib helpers, we'll just say machine.ts. And if you're curious about how the functions work, it's just checking to see if the window is actually defined. So window is just a global variable inside of your code that represents, like, you know, basically the entire screen that you have. And so if that screen doesn't exist, then that means that you're running on the server. So right here it says if the window variable is equal to undefined, in other words, if it doesn't exist, then that means that you're running on the server, and this function will return true. Otherwise, if it's not undefined, that means that it does exist, and if it does exist, then isClient will return true. So that's all that's doing. A pretty handy helper function to have. And yeah, so I think that's about all I want to cover right now. So just to recap, added the DB folder with a models folder and the actual connection code to Mongoose. A hooks folder for all of our custom hooks, and I just went ahead and added the used local storage state one right away because we will definitely probably use that a lot at some point. Added the library folder, which has helpers and middleware. I want to talk more about middleware later, so I'm not going to add that right now. But currently, we're just using the machine helper function, which just returns, well, machine helper file, which returns two helper functions, which just tells us whether or not we're running on the server or the client. The providers folder, which is essentially just going to hold all of our provider components. And again, this essentially just allows us to make data globally available to all of the components that are nested within this component when we call it. So, super useful. Added, what else? Added the page components file, or folder, rather, inside of our components folder. So all page-specific components can go inside of a page folder that will be inside of page components. And then we'll just import them from our files inside of pages. So yeah, and so that's pretty much it in terms of like file structure and kind of getting the boilerplate up and running. So I think this is probably like something that we should try to do at the beginning of every next project. Just because I think this is generally like pretty scalable and something that we'll use as like a foundation for, you know, just creating any next project. And again, a lot of this is convention, so if you guys have any ideas of like a better, more organized way to do something, obviously we'll just do that instead. But this is just what I found to be, or to work the best for like kind of ease of access and getting things done quickly and keeping it minimal but also very highly functional. So so yeah, I think I will go ahead and end on that note.